So, guys, I want to talk about Samoa Joe winning the AEW championship. And I do want to talk about how that's mostly a good thing. And pardon me that they're blowing leaves outside. So that's why, I'm in my brother's room doing this. And you may hear them in the background, really. There are a couple of reasons why he is a good world champion right now, why I'm happy that AEW made the switch. I think the first reason is that it's not a long title reign. Like, Hangman Adam Page held the title for nearly 130 days, not even half a year. And one of the big problems with AEW is that they do very, very long title reigns. And that's good to say, hey, anytime, anywhere. And when that is also said, it's also a little unpredictable because a lot of people didn't think Samoa Joe was going to win. The story of Samoa Joe and Hangman Adam Page is that Joe was mostly upset with how his title was handed to him. But the other part of the story, and I think they're going to get into it more, is that Joe is like, you know what, I'm a world champion. I stepped away from it for a while, but I want to get back to who I really am, and I am a world champion. I'm not just some guy in the trios division. I need to be on the top of the company because that's where Joe should be, really. So there's the story. And then I also will talk about unpredictability in the sense that I was predicting that what they wanted to do was like maybe Hangman Swerve and Osprey at Wembley Stadium, or Swerve or Osprey versus Hangman at Wembley Stadium, and then they would drop the title there. But obviously, that's very predictable. And then the other thing too is we don't know Will Ospreay's actually going to come back to television. Like I said, we don't have that crystal ball. We don't know how soon he's going to be or not. So giving it to Joe breaks up that predictability. The other thing that I will say is that Joe is a really great veteran because the thing about it is that when you have a wrestler like Samoa Joe, and I believe he started in the early 2000s. He's been to TNA Wrestling. He's worked through the Aces of Eights. He's worked through the main event Mafia. He's been in WWE for a little bit. So he definitely will be like, okay, with the writer's room, I expect these things to happen. And that's part of being a professional wrestler, is to say, okay, you know what? You got to know when you do the Hulk Hogan thing. He said, like, this is not good for me, brother. I got to poo-poo on this script and all that. Like, he can definitely be that person that's like, okay, that's not to my standard, or this is what I think should happen, really. And it's not that he doesn't care about the company. He it's just that he cares about the quality, really. And I think that that's kind of what veterans always need to do. Like, for example, the Undertaker, when he's like the big backstage president, when it comes to the talent, or you have other people like Shawn Michaels, who knows how to book like things like NXT and other things like that. So you can have Joe be that person that's like, you know what, this television show, the stories, everything's like that. When you book my title reign, because I'm a veteran, I've lived through it all, you know what, you have to meet my standard, and if not, you guys got to go back into the writing room, and or I'm going to be in the writing room and I'm going to say, hey, this is how things should go, but I'm for the best interest of the company, like Dusty Rhodes or something like that. So that's also another important thing. The other important thing that I would say is that this is actually this is good for factions, because like the issue with AEW is that they have way too many factions, and they don't have a lot of good factions. Like, their best faction they ever had was the Don Callis family, because you have so many stars, you have so many pay-per-view level stars in that. You have Takeshita, Kyle Fletcher, Ospreay, Okada. And even like you put Hechicero or some of the other Spanish Mexican wrestlers in that group, they usually are in CMLL, or they're feuding with Bandito, really. So he has a lot of members that have good pay-per-views. Nobody else does that, but the problem is that his faction's very, very directionless, because now he has the Continental Classic and three of his wrestlers are fighting each other, and he's cool with it. When a faction leader would say, hey, you know what, why is this happening? Is there a rivalry? Is there dysfunction? Why are we doing this? But with Joe and the Ops, really, what you really establish with them is that they're badasses, they're tough guys, they get shit done, really. And that's kind of like the direction. And the direction is Joe saying, hey, you know what, I'm a champion, so I'm going to make everybody else in this group a champion. Or, hey, you know what, you pick a fight with us, and we're going to just take care of you, really. So that's the ultimate. So it's very similar to the Hurt Syndicate. And I think that's kind of the thing. They're very very similar to the Hurt Syndicate, except you have Joe on top, not MVP. And I don't have a problem with that. And then also you say, hey, um, Joe is the world champion. You know, what title is Hook gonna have? What title is Shibata gonna have? What title is the other member is gonna have? Powerhouse Hobbs gonna have? You know, like that could be a thing. You can even have something like maybe Hook versus Bandito, or Hobbs versus Bandito, or Shibata versus Bandito for the ROH championship. You know, so there's definitely a lot that you can kind of do with that. Um, but Joe's a good faction leader, in my opinion. And also, too, these guys are these physical, really strong specimens, or they're known for being badasses. And that's kind of been one of the big problems with AEW, is that you look at the Death Riders, and one of the big criticisms is that they've been pushing Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta, and they don't look like, they have any muscles on their body, really. And Pac was really skinny, but now he is probably taking the roids or whatever, really. So it's good that you have, people in that faction that are like, okay, you know what, with Joe, is that okay? You know, we're all badasses. They've proven what they can do, really, and that's important. The other thing about it that I also think that there's a lot of exciting matches up. You can have Joe, you can have Hobbs eventually leave the group, then you can have Hobbs versus Samoa Joe, because a lot of people in AEW are supporting Hobbs. Like, they're saying, like, okay, this one of the reasons why it's not doing so well is because you don't have credible world champions. Like, Hangman and a lot of the other ones are like these, middleweight type of people. Hobbs looks like a heavyweight type of person. You can do Joe versus Hobbs, Joe versus Wardlow, Joe versus Okada, Joe versus Ospreay, Joe versus Bandito, even, because Bandito, was able to lift Brody King versus Joe. Like, there's so many like really really fresh matchups that have never happened before, and I think that's all important. And I think the last thing that I would say is really that the title reign of Hangman and Page has not been good. Like, he, like, I think, like, if I'm correct, it goes, him, then he had a match with Lee Moriarty in, like, Pennsylvania, and then he had a match with Kyle Fletcher, and it was kind of stupid because he kind of manipulated Kyle Fletcher and signed contracts saying the Don Callis family would not interfere, who would sign that. And then, you had Samoa Joe, and then you had Samoa Joe again. So, that's not really that great, and I do blame, like, there being a lack of stars. And then the other problem is that you can't do Hangman and Strickland, because Hangman and Strickland have been feuding with each other. Now they're like, working with each other now. So the problem is that, we're just doing repeat mode. So it's good with Joe because there's a lot of, like, matchups that he's had that either feel fresh or feel like, okay, it's not happened before. And that's kind of what's good about a world champion, is that sometimes you may have people that are like, okay, look at how many pay-per-view matches you can have with this person versus this person. Like, for example, like John Cena, look at all the matches you can have with him, but the problem is a lot of it is repeat. Like, him and Randy Orton, or him and AJ Styles. But then you look at somebody like Cody Rhodes, where, when he was first champion, everything was like a fresh matchup because he hadn't held the title before, and there are a lot of people he hasn't really faced. Or when you put the title on Gunter, or when you put the title, if Joe Hendry goes to the company, or Mike Santana, or Ricky Starks, or a lot of other people. Sometimes it's good to have a new champion, because that new champion will be like, hey, it feels like a lot more fresher and whatever, really. So I think there's a lot of positives to it. And then the other issue is the ratings. Like AEW struggles with television ratings. So sometimes, you need to say to yourself, we need to be reactionary to it. Like, the ratings have kind of gone down. Last year they went down like 40%, really. But at the start of this year, I think they're around like 600,000. Now they're around 400,000. And with Collision, they're in very dangerous territory of them being canceled. So you got to react accordingly. There's a reason why they put the ROH Championship on Bandito after Chris Jericho was not really doing any good for that. And then there's a reason why, you had to say, hey, Hangman, it's not working. We got to give Joe like maybe like a few months, maybe until Revolution. And if it's not working with Joe, then we got to find a person after that as well. Really, we got to give it to MJF. We got to give it to somebody else, really. But and part of that is Hangman's fault, really. And I think that part of it's bad booking and him not being on top of the booking department. And then, as they said, there are some people who are better title chasers, and I think that that's the last argument is that Joe's a better champion because, Joe's a badass. He's legitimate. He's a great final boss, and also too, he has really great matches. He's a veteran. There's a lot of things you can do with Joe. He can work with anybody, and he's also credible because he's a bigger body guy versus Hangman, who is a middleweight cowboy. So, that makes a world champion. It's really how you look, how you carry yourself, what you want to bring out of other people, and the stories that you can tell. And the story that I think Joe wants to say that he fits the world champion role, and he wants to be the king of the throne. Like this is who I am, and nobody's going to take that away from me. Or you're going to take it away from me. You really have to be that force of nature. And he has like people who are badasses behind him instead of people who are skinny ass like Danny Garcia and Wheeler Yuta, really. So you really have to, if you want to like slay the dragon, you have to show that dragon. You know what? I'm that really badass knight in shining armor, really. Like, and that's kind of with Joe. That's kind of really the story of it. And then you look at Hangman and you see like how usually when he loses something, when he's angry and desperate. And when he really wants to be on top, really, he's a really great title chaser. So I really think that sometimes people just don't make good champions. Because like I said, when he was the champion, there's really no other story you can tell with him outside of Swerve and Ospreay helped him. So therefore, he should give them like friendly rivalry. But they were gone for such a long time, really. And then also, like, his first reign was really just him keep the belt warm for CM Punk. And as I said, I really think that he should be a three-time champion, but you really have to say, hey, here are the few people he's going to feud with, and this is how far we're going to really take it, really. This is how far we're going to work with Hangman and give him a chance, really, because I really think in both reigns he's not been given a really good chance. But also the other thing, too, is that when he's had people who were kind of innovative or new people like Kyle Fletcher, he really just didn't live expectations, or even with Lee Moriarty, like Tiger style. He went back to Ring of Honor. This wasn't something that was like, oh well, look at this match you had with him. Maybe one day you're going to be world champion. We're going to build you upwards. So that's not what a good world champion is. A good world champion is like Triple H. Like when Matt Hardy pinned him. No, when Jeff Hardy pinned him, without gaining the championship, it led to that momentum of maybe Jeff Hardy can be a world champion one day. And with Joe, I feel like that could happen a lot more than Hangman Adam Page, really. Hangman Adam Page has proven that, he didn't make anybody better. Kyle Fletcher is still going after midweight titles. Lee Moriarty is still in Ring of Honor, and Samoa Joe just usurped him, but it doesn't matter because he's been a former champion, really. So I really think that the positives outweigh the negatives. I think that definitely Joe as a world champion is a really great call.